So I have to say, I recently watched The Silence of the Lambs. And it's a really good movie. And Hannibal Lecter is a really good villain in that movie. Have you guys seen this movie lately?
It's been a while, but I had seen
a while, yeah.
Probably a couple decades. But yeah, we've written like 3 stories now, I think, about why Trump keeps talking about Hannibal Lecter.
Mm-hmm.
He's talking about the border, and he talks about asylum, and then he thinks about crazy people, and then somehow this becomes a thing about Hannibal Lecter.
The other thing that I did want to add here, though, is because of all this like Hannibal Lecter referencing in Trump rallies, I was thinking about what if you had a movie marathon of all the movies related to the cultural touchstones of this election. So you would have Silence of the Lambs. You'd obviously have Hillbilly Elegy, Friday Night Lights, Tim Walz, everyone's saying that he's like Coach Taylor or whatever his name is from that movie/TV show. Welcome to The Campaign Moment on this Friday, August 16th. I'm Martine Powers, co-host of Post Reports.
And I'm Aaron Blake, senior politics reporter and author of the Campaign Moment newsletter. We're also joined this week by Liz Goodwin, who covers the Senate here at the Washington Post. Hey, Liz.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So today we are looking ahead to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago next week. We're going to talk about who's going to be there and what this convention will say about this momentous month for the Democrats.
We're also going to talk about some polling, which of course is something that I talk about a lot on this podcast. And while polls are looking up for Kamala Harris right now, I wanted to get into whether the enthusiasm that we're seeing for Democrats right now might be boosting Democrats in the House and the Senate as well.
Which seems like a really important question to understand. But first, Liz, we really wanted to talk to you for a lot of reasons, but especially to talk about Kamala Harris's policy stances and the experiences that inform her policy. So you reported this week on how Harris really cut her teeth in the Senate by grilling Republicans during the Trump administration. And we remember these clips of her questioning officials like former attorneys general Jeff Sessions and Bill Barr.
My question is only as it relates to your knowledge.
I don't have the detailed memory of that.
Okay, as it relates to your knowledge. Did you have any communication with any Russian businessmen or any Russian nationals?
And these clips would go viral of her asking the tough questions.
Russian businessmen or Russian nationals.
Are you aware of any communication?
A lot of people were at the convention. It's conceivable that somebody came up to me.
Sir, I have just a few.
Will you let me qualify it? If I don't qualify it, you'll accuse me of lying. So I need to be correct as best I can.
I do want you to be honest.
And I'm not able to be rushed this fast. It makes me nervous.
They really help boost her national profile. But at the same time, Liz, as you reported, she wasn't necessarily known for any particular legislative or policy wins, was she?
No, she definitely wasn't. And, to be fair, she was in the minority all 4 years that she was in the Senate. So it's usually not a time you're going to notch huge policy wins anyway. But even for that environment, that atmosphere, she was sort of less active legislatively in terms of trying to get involved in bipartisan type things that had a chance of passing in this, Republican unified government. She wasn't on the front lines of that at all. So she had a few kind of smaller things that did at least pass the Senate, a couple things that became law, but she was not, in the trenches there trying to form those bipartisan relationships to get stuff over the line like some senators are, but she also wasn't there for very long.
Mm-hmm. Well, how do you see that reflected in her campaign now and in the criticisms that a lot of people have made that her campaign has been light on actual policy, at least up until this point?
Yeah, I think this is something that has dogged Kamala Harris for a while, really, is that, she came into the Senate, she was elected the same day Trump was, right? So it was this very whoa, crazy moment for Democrats in particular. They were feeling very depressed. She was sort of this bright light people were already floating as a potential person who was going to run against Trump 4 years later. But then, what ended up sort of hampering that run, which she did end up making, was this feeling of, well, where do you really stand? What do you really want to do? And there were people like Elizabeth Warren just pumping out policy paper after policy paper. And
that was definitely Warren's thing.
yes. And, Bernie, everybody kind of knows, even when he's not super detailed, you know where he stands, you know what he wants. And same with Biden in his own way, too. So that was always a struggle for her. And, aides to her have said that like legislation really wasn't her thing. She's like an executive. She wants to just make a decision, get all the information, think about it, analyze it, and then make a call. She doesn't really want to go to the drawing board, start over and like make legislation and try to make all these alliances that get it over the finish line. So I think this is something that has deeper roots than just this election, essentially.
And as you said, that's coming out now in terms of people saying that what we've heard on the trail so far, and again, admittedly, it's only been a few weeks, but that she just speaks in pretty broad or vague terms about what she would want to achieve if she were elected president. She's also walked back a lot of positions that she took when she ran to be the Democratic nominee back in 2020. People have called her a flip-flopper or kind of flaky on policy, though to be fair, that is changing now, right? Aaron, I know you've been looking at the policy platform that she just put out. What is it, today?
Yeah, she's putting it out today. She's giving a speech on this. Of course, we should emphasize that we're recording this before that speech, but we do have a sense for what the proposals are going to be. Some of the big ones that are going to be the headlines include a $6,000 child tax credit, up to $25,000 of government assistance for first-time homebuyers, universal $35 insulin caps, and $2,000 out-of-pocket maximum for prescription drugs. And of course, we've seen previously some of the proposals that she's put forward, including minimum wage increases and paid leave, no tax on tips, which is something that she kind of echoed Trump in putting forward. And then, of course, I think the big one that a lot of people are talking about right now, which we got a little bit of a preview of this week, was an effort to combat so-called price gouging in a grocery and food industry. So the idea that prices are rising not because of just inflation, but because of corporate greed. She's going to put forward a plan to deal with that.
Well, can I just ask about that? Because that one confused me. Like, how do you tell companies to charge less money for milk? Like, what's the actual detail of the plan there?
The actual details are a little bit thin right now, and I think that the prevailing view of economists is that this is largely unworkable and that this is something that is probably more of a campaign ploy than a serious policy idea, like the idea that you're going to get Congress to come together on some kind of a plan that's actually going to make a difference on this seems pretty far-fetched, especially in the Senate where Republicans can block it. And of course, Republicans regard this as being, socialist in nature, the idea that you're controlling prices from the government. And that's something that I think, is going to make this policy kind of a little bit of a punching bag. But what we do see in Harris's policies that she's putting forward, and I'd very much include that in here, is something of an effort to play up populism and put forward these kind of grand ideas about, things that are going to help the people, but maybe involve more government to do so. And these are things that are going to, at least on their surface, probably be popular, but effectuating them through the congressional process is really very difficult.
It does seem like the theme here in a lot of what she's put out, especially in what we're seeing today, is like free money, like either we're going to give you some money or you're going to pay less money for the thing that you already have to pay for, which obviously would be probably popular, both sides of the aisle. Though, as you pointed out, I think it's interesting that both the proposal to, no taxes on tips, that tips wouldn't be taxed. As you said, Trump has already put that out as something that he wants to achieve. Increasing the child tax credit, that's something that vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance has said that he wanted. So it's like, it almost seems like they're trying to pull the rug out from under the Republican side of the ticket to offer up the same ideas of like, let's find ways to either give you money or have you pay less money to the government or to for what you need to buy.
Yeah, it's clear they're trying to one-up the Trump campaign. I mean, it's no coincidence that J.D. Vance put forward a $5,000 tax credit, and then Kamala Harris puts forward a $6,000 one. The tax
is Vance going to put out a $7,000 one after this now?
This is now 8-minute abs. I don't know if anybody gets that reference, but
I don't get the reference. I'm sorry.
It's what is it from? What's 8-minute abs from? Is that from? There's something about Mary. It's like there was the 9-minute abs videotape that people were doing in the 90s. And the guy's big idea was like, I'm going to put out something that's 8-minute abs. And they're having a discussion about like how you can't even get a workout in 8 minutes. Like, how is this even possible? This is ridiculous. It's just, anyway, it's funny. People should check it out.
You could add that to the movie marathon. Just things that you could watch related to this election.
So Vance does $5,000 on the child tax credit. Harris does $6,000. Harris's taxes on tips, elimination is somewhat different in that it's supposed to be more focused towards lower and middle class, whereas the Trump version has been criticized as potentially being kind of a handout to wealthy people who could reclassify commissions and bonuses as being tips in order to avoid those taxes. Another way I think this is really interesting is that she's not just kind of one-upping the Trump ticket, she's kind of one-upping Biden and what he was proposing before. So Biden's child tax credit was up to $3,600. So you kind of get where this is coming from. Like, it's a step beyond the other people who are running for president. And I think that gets at the idea that maybe this is less focused on what she's actually going to do when she's president and more focused on a political message of, hey, look, mine is better because it's more.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the Senate, a lot of her early policy stands were about immigration, because that was the time when, Democrats were really trying to push back against Trump's message on undocumented immigrants. And one of the first laws that Harris introduced was to ensure that everyone who's in Border Patrol custody has access to an attorney. And her first speech was on, being an undocumented immigrant is not a crime. And there was a lot of like DREAM Act stuff. And that is just so absent from her messaging now. It's really striking, like how immigration is the thing that feels like it's changed the most.
Yeah.
Okay, so I did get the right movie. It is There's Something About Mary. But just so we're setting the record straight here, I want to make sure that I give people factual information. The existing ab workout that is real and in real life was 8-minute abs. And he was proposing 7-minute abs. So I don't want any corrections on this podcast, people.
No emails sent to Aaron saying you need to rewatch this movie again because you got it wrong. No, I need to see this movie. I know that it's a classic. Though getting back to this point about what Harris is proposing, how it's going even beyond, some of the things that Biden has proposed or tried to put in place, there's this question that is overriding all of this, which is that Harris is currently the vice president. She certainly has the ear of the president. Like, if they wanted to try to get across some of these proposals now, they could do that. Like, she could do that. She could be pushing for that in the moment. And I wonder how much voters are asking, well, why haven't you done it yet in the last 3.5 years if you're so passionate about some of these ideas?
I think that's a great question. There's a sort of an awkwardness as running on change when you're the vice president. I think it's kind of working just because people just really associate Joe Biden with the moment right now. And she can kind of credibly say, well, I'm not in charge and I would be in charge. And that's a different administration. I think Trump also did this a lot. Like, I just remember when he was president, he would always kind of tweet like, at the Fed, I'm mad at you. Or like, they really should stop doing XYZ. Like, he was very good at just like kind of disassociating himself from things that weren't going well, even though he was in charge. I mean, he lost, so I don't know how well it really worked at the end of the day, but there is some precedent for that of just kind of trying to reinvent yourself as like not in charge when you are in charge.
And this is something that we're seeing in Harris's poll numbers. If you look at how she polls on the economy, on immigration, on abortion, on a lot of these issues, she polls better than Biden did. So people seem to intuit somewhat of a difference between the two. There was actually a poll that showed it dead even. As many people liked Harris on the economy as Trump this week.
I do want to ask one other thing about the potential for Vice President Harris to achieve some of these policy ideas if she becomes president. And that's what happens to the House and the Senate, right? That if there is this trifecta where Democrats are able to maintain control of the Senate and win over control of the House, that would empower Harris, if she were president, to get a lot more of this stuff done. And if that's not the case, then all these ideas that she's putting out there are likely to just be these like pie in the sky ideas. So what's the current understanding on the map for the House and the Senate and where that could go in November?
So Democrats need to net 4 seats in order to take over the Republican-controlled House, which is very close. The generic ballot, which is a key measure on this front, shows them leading by 1 point right now in the averages, so should be a very close race for the House. And then the Senate is also very close. Democrats have a 51-49 majority, but if you look at the 7 or 8 most competitive seats that are up, they're all seats that Democrats are defending, including 3 of those in red states. So it's a very difficult map for Democrats. They need to have Sherrod Brown win in Ohio, for instance. John Tester in Montana is going to be a very tough one. And then they very likely have already lost West Virginia, which is where Senator Joe Manchin is retiring. And that's probably gone because Democrats don't have a strong recruit. It's a very red state, which means this process basically starts at a 50-50 tie, and Democrats can't even lose one more seat and still hold the majority. I will say, though, that the early evidence that we're getting on this front, and there was a slew of polls from the Cook Political Report on Thursday, showed Democrats gaining ground in these Senate races as well, to the point where they lead by 7 points in those swing states.
And is that a result of Harris being the nominee and this idea that the Democratic enthusiasm for her might help lift the boats of these other Democrat candidates?
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of these candidates were already running pretty far ahead of President Biden. So there was a real question about whether they would also gain as Harris has been gaining in the polls. And the limited evidence we have so far suggests that they are. There is, though, a big caveat here. And as I mentioned, the map is very tough. Montana is looking like a very tough race. Ohio could be a tough race. And those could be states that you lose even if you win the presidential race.
Liz, what are you hearing about this? And especially from senators who are trying to forecast how this is all going to play out.
Yeah, so I was just in Michigan this week with Alyssa Slotkin, who's running for Senate there. That's an open seat. So a lot of these Senate races are Democratic incumbents who are really well known in their states and kind of have their own brands. And that's part of why they were running ahead of Biden, as Aaron was saying. But this is a case where she really doesn't have her own brand. Half the state doesn't really know who she is because she's just a congresswoman. And she's running against Mike Rogers, who represented her same district when he was in Congress but then left. And so it's been a while. So both of them are much more tied to like Trump's brand and Harris's brand than a lot of these other Senate races because they're not very well known. And so that's a place where you just really see the difference with Harris becoming the top of the ticket. You know, Slotkin was sort of like ducking Biden events and trying to run away from them. And now whenever there's any kind of Harris or Walz thing, she's right there, just much more comfortable running as a ticket. And it's very visible. Another thing about Michigan that's interesting is they have so many women. Like people joke there, like, if you're a man, can you even win a Democratic primary in Michigan? They have a ton of women. Well, Gretchen Whitmer is really setting the tone as the governor, but you know, they have Debbie Stabenow, who is retiring. That's who Slotkin's trying to replace. And they had a Secretary of State, the AG, just tons of statewide officials there. It all kind of flipped to female in 2018 as part of like the reaction to Trump. So that's something that I think, like, having Harris at the top of the ticket, like, people are really jazzed there. Like, voters are just like, woo, woman. Like, you hear like the women thing a lot more than other states, which was kind of interesting. And Slotkin's sort of benefiting from that and leaning into that.
Yeah. We'll keep an eye on that as this all continues to unfold. All right, so we're going to take a quick break there, and then when we come back, we're going to be looking ahead to the Democratic National Convention happening in Chicago next week. Will Taylor Swift be there? Will Beyonce be there? Those are the pressing questions that we must address.
The big questions.
We'll be right back. All right, so turning to next week, the Democrats are having their convention in Chicago. Unfortunately, I will not be there, which I'm very sad about.
We're going to miss you.
I had a blast going to the RNC. Aaron, you will be there. Our colleague Elahe Izadi from the show will be there as well, talking to you. Liz, are you going to go to Chicago?
I'm not. I scheduled my vacation for the convention because I hate conventions. But
Smart.
but once I realized that it was like Harris instead of Biden, I felt like, oh, that was probably more interesting. But
Well, there was when in the brief period where we thought there was going to be an open convention and that there would be
I
like
know.
haggling on the floor, I was like, oh my God, maybe I should beg my boss to let me go. And at this point, I'm like, it's fine. I can watch it on TV. It'll be okay.
Yeah, agreed. My editor for one day was kind of like, can you get out of your Airbnb? Because we might have an open convention. But then like the consolidation around Harris happened so fast. She was like, whatever, you're fine.
And the rules around those Airbnbs are airtight. You're never
they
getting
are
your money
airtight.
back.
Yes.
Well, so let me ask this. What does this convention mark for the Democrats and for the race overall right now? Like, why is this an important moment, considering all the flux that we've seen over the last 1 to 2 months?
Yeah, I think it's we've certainly seen some of what Harris is putting forward in her rallies, and there's been a lot of attention on those rallies, a lot of Democratic enthusiasm. But a convention is an unusual event even in that context. This is a 4-day pre-produced spectacle that's kind of almost a 4-day infomercial for people to pay attention to and kind of learn what the Democratic Party says it's going to be about in this election. And so I think we're going to see even more eyeballs on it and more people kind of tuning in to what Harris is all about. We usually see candidates, of course, get a little bit of a bump out of the convention. It'll be interesting to see if Harris gets that, given she's already rising in the polls. But there are decisions to be made here for the Harris campaign. Like, does the message differ at all? Do they go some places that they haven't in some of these speeches? How do you package this moment in a way that gets people to continue to be excited about this campaign and kind of keep that momentum rolling?
Yeah, and I feel like Democrats have been through a lot in the past 2 months. And even though everything's kind of like all good now, vibes wise, I think there is still some like healing and consolidation that needs to happen. People need to figure out like, how do we feel about Joe Biden? He's going to have a day. All these huge Democratic leaders are going to be there. And how do they message that Biden kind of getting pushed off the stage, if we're being honest? Like, how do we make that like sound okay is the challenge for Democrats.
That is what I'm fascinated by.
Yeah, me too.
Well, because he's supposed to be speaking on Monday now, which I'm maybe reading too much into this, but it feels like if you go on the first day, that's like the stuff that people that they're trying to get out of the way.
You're not reading too much into it, no.
Well, and it does, I feel like it is going to be I don't know if an awkward moment, a poignant moment, like this man who up until basically a month ago was going to be the star and the center of attention of this entire event, who is now very much on the sidelines. And I think there will be this, opportunity of like, thanks, Joe Biden. And you heard that even this week when you saw Harris and Biden do their first joint event together on Thursday, where the crowd was chanting like, thank you, Joe. But at the same time, it seems like Harris's campaign doesn't see a lot of benefit to Harris for having Biden around her a lot.
I agree. I think like that the way that the Kamala Harris campaign and she herself have handled the Biden getting pushed aside storyline is, in some ways, it's the trickiest thing she's had to deal with as a candidate. And she's done it really well. There's not even been a glimmer of like, thirsty VP, like elbowing Biden away. It's been really pitch perfect. And it's the hardest thing, especially as a woman candidate, where the worst thing you can be is ambitious and hungry and whatever. Yeah, like there's always a caricature just waiting there for you. And she's managed to avoid this. So
Interesting. So there are a couple other things that I'm going to be keeping my eye on as I'm watching from afar as to how this convention unfolds. Obviously, there's the threat of protests, and we had a story in Post Reports earlier this week about what it will mean to see, especially Arab American communities from around Illinois coming in to protest the Democratic Party's support of Israel and the war in Gaza, and we'll see how significant those protests are. Of course, there's also this question of cybersecurity. I don't know if this is necessarily related related specifically to the convention, but I think it is on the minds of folks in Harris's campaign. The fact that the FBI acknowledged this week that it is investigating suspected hacking attempts by Iran of both a Trump associate and advisors to the Biden-Harris campaign. But then on a lighter note, there's this question of who is going to be showing up to this convention on the celebrity side. And I think there are two people that are on everyone's minds, and that is Taylor and Beyonce. What are the chances that they will be here?
I don't know. I feel like the Taylor thing is always like a white whale. Like, it's like Taylor Swift's about to endorse. Like,
but she endorsed him before. She endorsed Biden in the past. It's not like there's not a precedent for that.
No, it's true. It's true. I don't know. Aaron probably has more intel since he's actually going.
Since he's a big Taylor fan.
I mean, it would be political malpractice not to at least try and get Taylor Swift to show up at the convention. If there's one figure who seemingly could have an impact on the race, it would be her, like just as far as mobilizing young people and things like that. And as you mentioned, she did back Biden in 2020, so it wouldn't be a shocking thing for her to get involved in this. It's just a question of how much she would want to get involved. And of course, you know, a few months ago, we had Republicans were kind of anticipating this moment that Swift would get involved. And there was talk about whether there was some kind of a CIA psyop with Taylor Swift, which I think we talked about on this show, which was just like...
Was that in the like Travis Kelce era?
Yes.
I have a vague memory about this.
The Super Bowl was thrown to the Chiefs so that Travis Kelce could win. And then Taylor Swift would then endorse Joe Biden. And there were versions of this, but it was all just very crazy. But I think the backdrop of it was Republicans kind of signaling that she probably shouldn't get involved because they don't want her to. If you're going to do this, we're going to go after you kind of thing. Like, that was my theory, at least at the time. But I think we're likely to see some bigger stars than Kid Rock and Lee Greenwood and Hulk Hogan at the Democratic National Convention.
And of course, those were the folks who showed up to the
Republican National Convention, yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how much the Democratic Party leans into that.
I think Beyonce would make a lot of sense because she did a ton for Hillary in 2016. And then she's also the walk-up music for Kamala Harris right now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, is she? Which song?
Yeah, Freedom, which is actually like a very kind of like edgy choice. And it's like, it's actually a great walk-up song. Like the first time I heard it, I was like, huh. And then, you know, now I'm into it officially.
They never look at the lyrics when they... use these songs at political rallies, which is something that I love. Like Trump's big song for a long time was the Rolling Stones' "You Can't Always Get What You Want," which is like a very
so
like,
funny.
It's like sending a message to people like, yeah, well, he's going to say some stuff, but you're not going to get it.
Yeah, I think that was a message to the Republican Party, like the establishment.
maybe that's the way it was envisioned. But I've always been struck by that as just like, and then like, people playing like "Born in the USA," which is like not a super like pro-America song. Like it's actually kind of the opposite of that. I just love that they never actually look at the lyrics, or maybe they do and they just decide that what these songs are about, even though it's not what they're actually about.
Yeah. Like how many of these are breakup songs or not necessarily the like, let's all be united and loving this person. All right. I think that's all the time we have for our conversation today. Liz, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Liz Goodwin is a congressional reporter who covers the Senate for The Post. And of course, Aaron Blake is a senior political reporter and author of the Campaign Moment newsletter.
And as always, make sure that you're subscribing to the Campaign Moment newsletter. You can find a link in our show notes and at postreports.com. And if you're tuning in via Post Reports, please subscribe to the Campaign Moment podcast. We have a lot of great episodes from the Democratic National Convention in Chicago next week that you won't be able to find anywhere else. Today's episode was produced by Laura Benshoff and mixed by Rennie Svirnovskiy. It was edited by Lucy Perkins and Mary Jo Murphy.
Our team also includes Maggie Penman, Rena Flores, Monica Campbell, Ted Muldoon, Alana Gordon, Ariel Plotnick, Bishop Sand, Sabby Robinson, Emma Talkoff, Sean Carter, Peter Bresnan, Ali Bianco, Trinity Webster Bass, Allison Michaels, Renita Jablonski, and Lahe Azadi. I'm Martine Powers.
And I'm Aaron Blake.
And we will see you next week. Aaron, have fun in Chicago.
I'll try.
That didn't sound convincing.